The advanced settings are provided for tuning larger active areas, changing default operation, and setting up controller networking. Refer to the basic setup before using advanced functions. Not all advanced functions will be required. For first-time connections, follow the instructions in the basic settings. Use the same password for all controllers which will be connected in a network. Password can also be used as a simple method of grouping controllers for remote switching. Once set, the password must be used for any future connections to the controller. If a reduction of the raw signal level is required, click the Advanced Surface Settings button and change the raw signal offset setting to a higher value. If an increase in the raw signal level is required, decrease the value of the raw signal offset setting. Repeat this process to achieve a raw signal level between 4000 and 10,000. Leave the gain setting untouched unless the raw signal data shows excessive electrical noise indicated by the data stream spanning more than 250 units. In this case, decreasing the gain may improve system operation, and additional improvement may be possible by adjusting the raw signal level to lower than the minimum recommended value of 4000. In the bottom graph, take note of the largest peaks in the noise band. You may need to touch the active area to provide a scale reference. Set the minimum threshold to double this level in the touch settings window. If other tuning changes are made later, this step may need to be repeated. Test the system sensitivity by touching the active area. Start with a single finger, then 2 fingers, etc., and finally the palm of one hand. If all of the touches exceed the adaptive threshold, represented by the red line in the lower graph, the sensitivity is acceptable and no changes are required. Ideally, all touches will exceed the threshold by at least 20% of the height. If some signals fall below the threshold, then firstly adjust the threshold offset to a lower value, but not less than 4, and recheck sensitivity with fingers and palm. If the adaptive threshold responds too rapidly to random noise spikes, or when a touch command is incorrectly entered, increase the threshold response to higher values. Reduce the value if there are large fluctuations in the noise band or a large number of noise spikes are observed. When the adaptive threshold increases as a large step, take note of the time taken for it to return to the previous level. For some installations, touch commands may not be registered when the threshold is in a high state. In these cases, the threshold reset time can be decreased. Increasing the value of this setting can also be used to smooth out rapid changes caused by low values of the threshold response setting. If touches are still not reproducibly exceeding the adaptive threshold, then a change to the minimum touch duration will most likely be required. This setting changes the contact time, measured in milliseconds, defining what constitutes a touch, and produces enhanced touch signals when increased to larger values. When set to higher values, a hand will need to remain in contact with the surface longer to be registered as a touch. Shorter duration touches will not be detected, and multiple touches in rapid succession may be detected as a single touch event. Incrementally increase the value of this setting until touch signal strength is sufficiently high. High values of this setting also allow touches to be detected through overlying materials, and this is maximized with smaller active areas. If the minimum touch duration is changed, readjust the minimum threshold. The threshold offset should also be checked and returned to its original value if signal strength is high enough. Now confirm the system responds as expected to touch commands and all signals exceed the adaptive threshold by at least 20% of its value. To change the default touch commands, set up networking or add timer functions, open the Map Settings window. Default operation ceases to function once mapping events have been set. To return to factory default settings, hold the button on the controller down for approximately 20 seconds while it is powered on. To change touch commands, start by pressing the plus sign. Select the active area which will receive the touch command, then choose a new touch command from the menu. Next, toggle the switches on or off to control which lights will be controlled by the new touch command and set the switching action from the menu according to the action required. different touch commands can be used to switch lights on and off. Typically, one of the smart toggle functions will be used. These differ only by what happens when multiple switches are being controlled either from one controller or multiple controllers configured in a network. When set to smart toggle on, all configured switches will turn on with the configured touch command. If one or more of the configured switches are already on, the touch command will switch all other configured switches on. When set to smart toggle off, all configured switches will turn off with the configured touch command. If one or more of the configured switches are already on, the touch command will switch all configured switches off. To use the timer feature, select the on switch action, then switch the timer to the on position and select the length of time the lights will remain on after entering the touch command. The same process is used to configure network touch commands. When selecting the switches which will be controlled, simply toggle the switches on or off on other listed controllers. It is useful to set a friendly name for each controller prior to configuring to make this step easier.